It's March 29, Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform continues its operation. My name is Svetlana Shaparenko, and now we will be talking about the spring sowing campaign, plans and existing challenges. Joining us online is Dmytro Solomchuk, People's Deputy of Ukraine, member of Verkhovna Rada Agrarian and Land Policy Committee. Mr. Dmytro, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Ms. Svetlana. So, Mr. Dmitry, the spring sowing campaign is at its start. Some of the regions have already initiated it. So what are the current forecasts and expectations? What are the results that we expect to see this year? Well, the sowing campaign this spring has already started. We've sown more than 470,000 hectares, mostly wheat, barley, pea. Then it continues. It all depends on the weather conditions, first of all. In different regions, the mostly sown regions, the most amount of work was done in Odessa region. What are the biggest challenges? Well, the biggest challenges are arising in the occupied regions, or those that were affected by the war the most. But if we compare Kherson region to its previous year condition, this year we have way more area sown because the deminers have demanded a lot of additional sowing territories. And the same situation is in Kharkiv region. We have more demand territories, which resulted in expansion of sowing area. Well, there is certain lack of material because a lot of material was either stolen or destroyed. And the charity foundation, the sowing campaign of the victory, forwarded more material to Kherson and Kharkiv regions and other regions that were affected by the war. In some regions there is some lack of sowing material, the seeds, and this is when different charity foundations step in, or other agrarians from other regions, they support each other. So what is the area that is planned to be sown this year, and how does it compare to the previous year's indicators? Well, it all depends on the weather, because there are territories that we may say experience some flooding and heavy raining, and if the weather conditions stabilize, I think they will come at the last season level. There are forecasts that the territory may decrease 2 to 3%, but I don't think so, because last year there were 50,000 hectares demand. This year it's 180,000 hectares. Well, the crops profile is changing a little bit due to the lack of desire of the agrarians to sow, for example, corn due to its economic return, and they switch to sowing, for example. Are there any attempts to sow some experimental crops this year, or are we going to gravitate to some traditional crops? Well, talking about large companies, they're sowing some traditional crops such as corn, soy, wheat. Well, talking about the smaller farmers, they sow some niche crops, because if you have 20, 50, 100 hectares of land, well, working with corn or wheat will result in loss. This is why the agrarians switch to vegetables such as onion, potato, or other niche crops. Does the blockade on the Polish border impact the plans of the sowing campaign? Because we understand there are certain complications in terms of exporting our agricultural products. Well, first of all, it influences the agrarians who were exporting their products to the countries of Western Europe, specifically the organic manufacturers, because they export most of their products through Polish border to Germany and Scandinavian countries. And today their storages are full. They experience certain logistical problems that impacts their financial condition. They have to apply to the banks for additional loans or raise other types of funding like grants or support from charity foundations. So what are the support programs that the agrarians may count on this year, both extended by our foreign partners and Ukrainian government? Well, 579 scheme bank loans are still working. There is additional funding allocated for this purpose this year. Also from the end of January, another foundation came in its operation to guarantee the loans for the farmers. It contemplates support with investment funds and funding of the receivables. Also, there are grants allocated for procurement of land. There are also grant programs from European Union for the subsidies in regions mostly affected by the war in amount from 4 to 8,000 hryvnia subsidy per hectare. Also, another foundation that supports the farmers is the sowing. The harvest of victory is supported by Warren Buffett, and we are also in negotiations with other governments and global organizations to raise support for our agrarians. Dear journalists, do we have any questions on the floor? Oksana Polishuk, Ukrinform. Mr. Dmytro, can you please confirm this trend that the agrarians started procuring less fuel in the fuel market due to the lack or insufficiency of funds, as they were able to sell less harvest last year and now they are unable to procure the fuel in the amounts that are necessary? I can confirm that the agrarians started procuring less fuel, less spare parts and fertilizers because the intensive technologies are currently resulting in loss. This is why the agrarians switch more to traditional technologies, more economic, with less forecasted harvest from 1 hectare. Thank you. Another question.
Good morning, Sir Lorenzo Cremonesi from the Italian daily Corriere della Sera. Sir, the impression is that the agricultural production in Ukraine, after all the difficulties, the war, the bombing, the mining, you name it, energy problems, it's not so bad. I mean, you are able to keep a good level of production. Your export through the corridor in the Black Sea is more or less as it was before the war. Can you tell us how much you forecast? What will be more or less the production of agricultural product this year comparing the year before the war? How much less will be in percentage? 10, 20, 30% less? Can you give an assessment? Thank you.
Well, I can say that the condition of the agrarian sector is not catastrophic. Those who are involved in cattle farming, they can feed their products to their cattle. Those who are involved in dairy products manufacturing, they still have some good return on their product. Others are in catastrophic situation. For example, the agrarians in the deoccupied regions, those who demine their fields, risking their lives, using their own efforts, they only survive thanks to the support of different foundations because they have nothing left and they're starting their businesses basically from scratch. If we check the economic analysis of the product and return compared to the last year, both wheat and rape and other crops such as corn, they were traded in loss. All of them, the situation is catastrophic in the southern regions. The wheat was procured at 3,000 hryvnias from the farmers, while its internal cost is 50 to 60% higher. Well, the amount of harvesting has increased thanks to the demining of more territories, but again, the agrarians, they refuse the intensive technologies of growing, and the harvest per hectare will be less this year. And for all of the crops, both bean, oil, and grain crops, this year again, it would all depend on the weather conditions, but I think that it will be on the level of 75-77 million tons. Meanwhile, during the pre-war period, the harvest was more than 100,000 tons. So it will be less, about 30-35%. Thank you, Mr. Dmytro. Another question. Mr. Dmytro, can you please sit? Now, there is an option being considered as to the participation of the state in demining of agricultural lands. In your opinion, what will it cost, the demining of 1 hectare of land? Well, it's difficult to say because there are different hectares, you know. Some hectares are more densely mined, and it takes, for example, 2 weeks to demine 1 hectare, but in other cases, after thorough inspection, the demining may take like half a day. So it's difficult to come up with certain price. And again, in some cases, people demine it using the hand mine detectors, or in other cases, they can be the demining machines. Well, demining is not cheap for sure. The farmers don't have enough funds. It's good if there is funding allocated for demining, like additional funding that in part may compensate their losses, because usually the farmers were either training themselves at state emergency service training centers, or were involved in the specialists from the armed forces or state emergency services, or they were going through the fields with their own employees, like putting the mines in the back of the trucks and thus bringing them out of the field. But hiring professional companies is pretty expensive. But can you please name what is the, say, threshold value which would be economically advantageous for the agricultural manufacturers? Well, basically, in the majority of cases, the agrarians were doing it by themselves because the costs come in thousands of dollars, and the return on 1 hectare last year was $50-60. Well, that's average statistical indicator all across Ukraine by all crops. Thank you very much, Mr. Dmytro, for your detailed answers. Let me remind you that we were talking about the spring sowing campaign, the plans and existing challenges, and Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform will continue its operation next year. We're working on the announcements. Stay tuned.